Captain James Mitchell had flown more hours than he could count, yet today felt different. The morning sun glinted off the tarmac of a mid-sized private airport in the Midwest, painting sleek jets in golden light. He walked briskly toward his assigned plane, a polished G650, its fuselage gleaming like a silver bullet. James ran a mental checklist: fuel levels, avionics, communication systems, but something tugged at the edges of his consciousness, a subtle unease he couldn't quite name. Experience had made him cautious, sometimes cynical, but today's unease was different. Inside the crew lounge, a tall, composed figure waited. Lieutenant Sarah Carter sat with her back straight, hands neatly folded on the table in front of her, her uniform crisp and professional. Sarah had joined the company recently, her Air Force credentials impeccable, decorated pilot, hundreds of hours in fighter jets and transport aircraft, and a reputation for calm precision under pressure. She rose as James approached, extending a firm, confident hand. "Captain Mitchell." "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Carter, your co-pilot for today's flight," she said, her voice even but carrying quiet authority. James studied her for a moment, taking in the meticulous polish of her appearance, the air of competence that seemed to surround her. There was something about her that made him slightly uncomfortable, something beyond the usual tension of meeting a new colleague. Perhaps it was her confidence, the calm certainty in her posture. Perhaps, he realized begrudgingly, it was something else entirely. James had flown with countless pilots in his career, men and women, veterans and rookies. But something about Sarah's presence unsettled him, and he didn't immediately understand why. "Lieutenant," he said, keeping his tone neutral, "let's run through pre-flight procedures and coordinate with the ground crew. We have a short window before the passengers arrive." His voice carried the weight of experience, yet beneath it, a subtle undertone of hesitation lurked. Sarah nodded, crisp and professional. "Understood, Captain. Shall we begin with the systems check?" James hesitated, a small crease forming on his forehead. He prided himself on composure and authority. He was a veteran. He had seen storms, turbulence, and emergencies that would rattle even the most seasoned pilots. And yet something about this assignment made him tense. Not danger, he thrived in danger, but the human element. The fact that he would be flying with Sarah, whose reputation he had heard whispered in aviation circles, gnawed at him. The plane itself seemed almost alive in the early morning light. Its engines gleamed like polished steel, and the cockpit instruments sparkled as if anticipating the hands that would guide them through the skis. James ran his fingers over the controls, checking switches, buttons, and displays. Sarah watched him silently, noting each gesture, each habit, and each ritual. She knew the plane intimately, had studied its systems in meticulous detail, and could operate it flawlessly. She did not intrude, allowing James to maintain the illusion of control, but her calm presence made the space feel charged. James's thoughts drifted uncomfortably. "I've flown with many co-pilots," he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "I know my procedures, I know the rhythm of a cockpit." He glanced at her, noticing the steady confidence in her gaze, the ease with which she observed him. For some reason, that confidence struck him as unsettling. It wasn't arrogance, it was competence, absolute and unflinching. James had seen arrogance, it annoyed him. Competence, unrecognized, intimidated him. Meanwhile, the ground crew to prepare the plane. Fuel trucks hissed and rumbled, luggage was loaded with careful precision, and maintenance engineers ran last-minute checks on engines and hydraulics. Sarah quietly coordinated with them, confirming schedules, flight plans, and weather data. She moved efficiently, seamlessly integrating herself into the operation without demanding attention. Yet every move she made was a subtle demonstration. She knew what she was doing, and she did it with unshakable confidence. Passengers would be boarding soon, corporate executives, a small entourage, and a few high-profile clients. The charter demanded discretion, efficiency, and absolute safety. In this environment, James felt the tension in a new way. He had flown VIP clients before, but the stakes felt higher. Sarah's presence, calm but commanding, exacerbated the tension. He told himself it was merely habit, caution, or routine stress. But deep inside, he sensed an unease he could not dismiss. a nagging feeling that his assumptions about who held authority were about to be challenged. James tried to maintain control, reviewing the flight plan. The route was straightforward, a 5-hour journey across several states. Weather reports were clear and navigation systems were fully operational. Yet, as he spoke through procedures with Sarah, he noticed how seamlessly she understood and anticipated every step. "Coordinate with ATC on departure sequence," she said, and he realized she had already logged into the system, preempting his instructions. Her expertise was undeniable, yet James's pride bristled. He found himself scrutinizing her, searching for flaws that didn't exist. She didn't hesitate, she didn't falter, and she didn't seek validation. Every instinct in James's veteran mind screamed that he should assert control, but the usual levers of authority felt useless. Sarah's calm efficiency rendered them irrelevant. He hadn't expected this dynamic. It unsettled him more than turbulence ever had. The announcement came. Passengers would board in 10 minutes. Sarah turned slightly, meeting James's eyes. "Everything is ready for your review, Captain. Shall we perform final checks together?" Her tone was professional, almost courteous, but carried a quiet confidence that left no room for argument. James opened his mouth, hesitated, and found no words. The control he had relied on for decades felt precarious, slipping like sand through his fingers. For the first time in years, James felt a flicker of uncertainty, a hesitation he could not ignore. He prided himself on experience, on judgment, on being the one in charge. But Sarah Carter's presence introduced an invisible challenge, a subtle but undeniable test of assumptions. And though he did not yet know it, this flight, the routine charter he had expected, would become a turning point, exposing not just professional tension but deeply held biases he had never confronted. As the final crew check concluded, James looked at Sarah again, nodding the calm composure that seemed to radiate from her. He thought about the upcoming flight, the passengers, and the cockpit dynamics. Something told him that today would be remembered, not for technical skill or smooth flying, but for the quiet, unyielding authority of a woman he had underestimated. James had no idea that the lesson was about to begin. The hum of engines and distant chatter from the tarmac created a rhythm that James could normally rely on. But today, it felt like a discordant note, echoing his growing discomfort. He and Sarah had completed pre-flight checks, yet the unspoken tension lingered like a heavy fog in the cockpit. James shifted uneasily in his seat, hands clasped over the control yoke, trying to marshal the composure he usually wore like armor. He began, hesitating, his voice catching slightly. Sarah looked up from her checklist, her expression calm but expectant. "Captain Mitchell," she prompted gently. James took a deep breath. The words he dreaded forming on his tongue seemed to resist him, yet he forced them out. "I can't fly with you," he muttered, voice low but firm. The words hung in the air, heavier than the engines idling behind them. Sarah blinked once, subtly surprised but far from offended. Her lips pressed into a polite smile. "I'm sorry," she asked, tilting her head slightly, her tone even and professional. It's not personal," he said, struggling to maintain an air of authority. "But I work best with co-pilots I know I can trust. Experience, rhythm, you know. I've flown with many co-pilots, but—" he faltered, realizing his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Sarah leaned back slightly, arms resting lightly on the console. She radiated composure, unwavering in the face of his awkwardness. "If trust is the issue," she replied, her voice calm, "I assure you I am fully qualified to operate this aircraft safely. If you will not fly, I can handle the cockpit alone." The words hit James like a jolt of cold air. Handle the cockpit alone. She had the audacity to assert authority without permission, and yet it wasn't arrogance. It was calm, precise, factual. He felt a spike of frustration, mingled with something deeper, a gnawing unease he couldn't ignore. Around them, ground crew glanced in their direction. Some whispered quietly, sensing the tension, while others carried on with tasks, unaware of the storm brewing in the cockpit. James's pride bristled. He had always been in control. the one whose decisions shaped the flight, whose authority was unquestioned. And now, facing a woman he barely knew, he felt that control slipping through his fingers. I don't think this will work," James said finally, his voice tight. He avoided her gaze, staring at the instruments as if they held the answers. Sarah remained poised, her calm confidence a mirror reflecting back his own insecurities. "You mean to say," she said slowly, "that you are refusing to fly because of who I am, not my ability?" Her tone was measured, professional, but the implication was unmistakable. James felt a flush rising in his face. He opened his mouth to respond but found himself momentarily speechless. "Yes, no," he muttered, flustered. "It's not like that, He paused, realizing the futility of trying to disguise his discomfort. Every attempt at explanation sounded weak, transparent. Sarah's presence had exposed the unspoken truth he had not wanted to confront. He had prejudged her. He had doubted her capability before even knowing her. Sarah's gaze remained steady. "Captain, if safety is your concern, I am fully qualified. If it is authority you seek, I can remind you that this aircraft and this flight are under my supervision." Her words were precise, deliberate, leaving no room for argument. The authority she projected was not derived from position alone. It radiated from competence, calm certainty, and the quiet strength of someone who had been tested under pressure countless times. James felt his heart rate spike. He had encountered difficult co-pilots before, personalities that challenged him, egos that clashed with his own. But none had confronted him like this, unflinchingly, with control and dignity, without resorting to theatrics or threats. The realization hit him with unsettling clarity. He had underestimated her. For a long moment, the cockpit fell silent except for the soft hum of idling engines and the occasional radio chatter from the tower. James's mind raced. He imagined the passengers boarding soon, unaware of the silent standoff unfolding above them. If word got back that the captain had refused to fly with his co-pilot, what would that do to his reputation? His career? He had spent decades building authority and respect, and it now felt precarious. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower, tinged with frustration and disbelief. "Are you saying you could actually fly this plane without me?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. Sarah's calm nod confirmed it. Every instinct in him screamed that he should assert control, but the usual levers of authority felt useless. She was prepared, competent, and unshakable. "Correct," she said, almost matter-of-factly. "I have piloted aircraft of this class many times. Safety is my priority. I can operate this plane without incident." She glanced at him once, her expression polite but unwavering. "The choice is yours. Follow protocol and conduct yourself professionally, or step aside." James's mouth went dry. Authority, experience, pride, all the tools he had relied on for decades, felt suddenly irrelevant. His assumptions had been shattered. The very woman he had judged and dismissed on the basis of subtle biases possessed both the competence and the authority he had assumed were his by default. He swallowed hard, the weight of realization pressing down on him. His hands fidgeted over the yoke, not from lack of skill, but from the shock of recognition. For the first time, he confronted the truth he had avoided. Prejudices could blind, assumptions could mislead, and authority could be far more complex than he had ever admitted. Ground crew began moving passengers toward the aircraft. The tension in the cockpit had escalated to a palpable, almost cinematic height. James looked at Sarah again. She was calm, collected, entirely unflustered. He noticed the faint glint of professionalism in her eyes, the subtle confidence in her posture, and the quiet, undeniable command she held over both the plane and the situation. James Mitchell, veteran pilot, felt a flush of embarrassment and fear mingled with awe. The flight he had assumed would be routine had transformed into a test of ego, authority, and human decency. He realized he had a choice: stubbornly cling to outdated assumptions or acknowledge reality and act professionally. The first choice could ruin him. The second could save his reputation and career. As the passengers climbed aboard, James made a decision. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and finally spoke with controlled, deliberate words. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside, "I will follow your lead. Let's ensure a safe flight." Sarah nodded once, acknowledgement passing between them like an unspoken pact. Authority, competence, and professionalism had won the silent battle in the cockpit. James would never forget this morning, nor the lesson it carried. And neither would the crew, watching quietly from the sidelines, sensing the shift in dynamics without fully understanding its magnitude. The plane awaited its journey, engines humming, passengers unaware, and James Mitchell finally realized that this flight, simple on the surface, was already a turning point in his life. He had refused, hesitated, and judged. But he would fly. And he would learn. The plane's cabin smelled faintly of leather and polish, a subtle reminder of luxury and precision. James Mitchell sat in the captain's seat, glancing at Sarah with a mixture of skepticism, frustration, and unspoken respect. He could feel the tension coiling in his chest like a spring. His hands rested lightly on the yoke, but his mind was racing. Each time he tried to assert authority, he found it slipping like water through his fingers. Sarah, seated beside him, moved with calm, unhurried efficiency, checking instruments and cross-referencing flight data with a practiced eye. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and unflappable. James attempted to regain control, speaking through a series of procedural checks he had memorized for decades. "Let's coordinate with air traffic," he said, voice measured but firm. "I'll handle tower communication and you monitor systems." Sarah nodded politely, but instead of following his command as a subordinate might, she subtly adjusted settings on the control panel, double-checking fuel balance, hydraulics, and avionics. "I've already initiated tower contact," she said calmly. "Everything is synchronized. Fuel levels are within optimal parameters, and all systems are operational." Her voice carried no arrogance, only the quiet certainty of someone who had been tested in the most challenging situations imaginable. James's brow furrowed. Every instinct in him screamed that he should assert dominance, remind her that he was the captain, the authority. Yet every attempt felt petty, almost absurd. He watched as she manipulated the instruments, adjusting headings with precision, noting small inconsistencies he might have missed. He realized with a sinking sensation that she was not just competent, she was exceptional. Every move she made radiated authority grounded in expertise, not ego. And for the first time in decades, James felt like an outsider in his own cockpit. He tried again, this time focusing on subtle challenges. "The flight plan I filed was cleared by the company," he said, voice carefully neutral. "We should follow it precisely. Any deviation could trigger compliance issues." Sarah glanced at him, her expression calm, almost serene. "Flight plan is sound," she replied. "However, minor adjustments for wind speed and air density will optimize fuel efficiency. Safety is paramount, but efficiency ensures sustainability and passenger comfort." The words were factual, almost clinical, yet delivered in a tone that brooked no argument. James's stomach twisted. He realized he was being outmaneuvered not by arrogance but by competence. Outside the cockpit windows, ground crew moved luggage and final equipment into the plane. Passengers, unaware of the silent battle unfolding in the cockpit, strolled toward the boarding steps, chatting and glancing at their phones. James felt a pang of embarrassment at the thought that they would never see the drama unfolding behind the closed cockpit door. This had become more than a professional challenge. It was a personal reckoning. He had assumed authority, only to discover that assumptions could be dangerously misleading. His own biases had blinded him, and now he was paying the price. Sarah continued to work, running through pre-flight checks with methodical precision. "Hydraulics are stable, navigation systems fully calibrated," she said, eyes scanning the array of instruments. "Communication with ATC is live and confirmed. Weather data indicates minor turbulence over the next 30 minutes, nothing beyond standard operational limits." Each word punctuated her expertise. Each movement reinforced her control over the plane's intricate systems. James realized he was no longer merely co-piloting. He was witnessing someone else lead with absolute authority, something he had never experienced in his career. His pride bristled and he struggled to maintain composure. I can make adjustments manually, he said, attempting to reclaim some semblance of authority. Sarah glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral, almost courteous. Captain Mitchell, she said, voice firm yet polite, manual intervention is unnecessary. The automated systems are functioning optimally, and my adjustments improve safety and efficiency. Any intervention should be deliberate and data-driven, not ego-driven. The statement, simple yet cutting, left him momentarily speechless. His mouth opened, then closed. Words failed him. James's hands tightened on the yoke. He had flown through storms, engine failures, and mechanical malfunctions without hesitation. Yet here, faced with a calm, precise, and competent professional, his experience felt irrelevant. He realized that authority, when unaccompanied by competence or humility, could crumble instantly. Sarah's presence had flipped the cockpit dynamic entirely. Her control was subtle yet undeniable, her efficiency evident in every measured movement, every precise word. He felt a mixture of awe, frustration, and reluctantly admiration. The flight's passenger manifest added another layer of pressure. Corporate executives and high-profile clients would board in minutes, oblivious to the professional showdown unfolding. James knew that any mistake, any sign of hesitation, could undermine his reputation permanently. And yet, every attempt to assert dominance felt increasingly hollow. Sarah had anticipated his every move, leaving him no leverage. For the first time in years, James felt the vulnerability of being outclassed in his own domain. The tension between them remained unspoken but palpable. James tried to focus on technical details, monitoring instruments and checking weather reports, but his mind kept returning to Sarah. How could someone so young, so calm, and so precise command such authority without challenging him outright? How had he misjudged her? And why did it feel like he was being evaluated, not for his skills, but for his character, his assumptions, his biases? The realization stung. Prejudice, he understood, could be blinding and costly. Sarah's subtle dominance was not just professional but psychological. Every motion she made reinforced that she belonged in the cockpit, that competence was her currency, and authority her natural consequence. James could not deny it. The cockpit, once his domain, now felt like neutral territory, a proving ground where expertise and composure reigned supreme. He recognized uncomfortably that he was being humbled, not through confrontation, but through quiet demonstration of skill, poise, and professionalism. A beep from the avionics panel broke the silence. Sarah checked it quickly, confirming the reading. Minor turbulence ahead, she said, voice calm, but well within operational parameters. Adjustments to heading and altitude recommended for smooth flight. James hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. He wanted to intervene, to assert control, to reclaim his pride, but every instinct told him it would be unnecessary and wrong. The lesson was unfolding in real time. Authority derived from competence, not position, demanded recognition. As boarding began, James watched Sarah move with practiced efficiency. Each passenger, unaware of the tension behind the cockpit door, represented a silent witness to the unfolding dynamic. Sarah handled communications with the tower, coordinated crew movements, and monitored systems seamlessly. James sat in the captain's seat, grappling with pride, humility, and the stark reality that this flight would be remembered not for turbulence or technical difficulty, but for the quiet, undeniable authority of the Copilot he had underestimated. By the time the last passenger boarded, James Mitchell understood a truth that would stay with him far beyond the flight. Assumptions could mislead, prejudice could blind, and true authority could never be claimed, only demonstrated. Sarah Carter had demonstrated it in the most subtle yet absolute way, leaving him to confront his biases, his pride, and the fragility of perceived control. The engines roared to life, the plane ready to ascend, and James felt the first stirrings of respect mingled with lingering discomfort. The cockpit was no longer a stage for his dominance, but a collaborative space governed by competence and professionalism. And as the plane began its taxi toward the runway, the silent battle of ego, authority, and judgment had already been decided, with Sarah Carter emerging as the undeniable victor. The runway stretched ahead, the sunlight reflecting off the polished fuselage, casting long, sharp shadows across the tarmac. James Mitchell sat tensely in the captain's seat, fingers tapping lightly against the yoke as he monitored every gauge and instrument. The engines hummed, powerful and ready, yet James felt an unfamiliar sense of unease gnawing at his chest. For decades, he had commanded aircraft and crews with unshakable authority. Yet here he was, unnerved by a co-pilot who had not only matched him in expertise but surpassed him in confidence and composure. Sarah Carter remained poised, her hands moving efficiently across the panels, verifying fuel levels, hydraulics, and navigation systems. Every action she took radiated calm authority. Her voice, steady and deliberate, guided the operation. All systems functional, turbulence minimal. Clearance confirmed with tower, she reported, her eyes briefly meeting his. James nodded stiffly, but a tension lingered in his shoulders he could not shake. There was something about her demeanor that unsettled him, a quiet but undeniable force he had never encountered before. "Captain Mitchell," Sarah began, her tone measured, "there is one more matter I'd like to address before takeoff." James blinked, slightly annoyed. He assumed it was procedural, a minor adjustment to the flight plan, yet her expression held a gravity that made him pause. "Yes?" he asked cautiously. Sarah leaned back slightly, removing her tailored flight jacket with deliberate precision. The movement revealed a perfectly fitted business suit beneath, subtle but unmistakably authoritative. She turned toward him, her eyes calm but piercing. "You've expressed concerns about flying with me," she said quietly. "Concerns I understand, though I believe unfounded." James's brow furrowed, unease prickling at the back of his neck. Then, with a measured, almost casual tone, she continued, "I am not only your co-pilot today, I am the owner of this aircraft." The words struck James like a thunderclap. For a moment he could not process them. His mouth opened, then closed, and he found himself speechless. The realization hit him slowly at first, then with devastating clarity. Every assumption he had made, every subtle bias he had allowed to guide his judgment, had been entirely misplaced. The co-pilot he had judged, doubted, and dismissed was not only qualified but held ultimate authority over the flight itself. James felt the blood drain from his face. His hands gripped the yoke instinctively, though the physical controls had no power over the situation he now faced. Pride, experience, reputation, all the foundations he had built his career on, felt fragile, almost laughably so. He had assumed authority, only to discover that true control resided elsewhere, in someone whose calm precision and professionalism had already his own. Sarah's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her tone polite but firm, "authority is not given by rank alone. It is earned through expertise, judgment, and professionalism. I am here to ensure this flight is conducted safely and efficiently. Your cooperation is appreciated." James swallowed hard, words failing him. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the engines. He could feel the weight of her authority pressing down, a tangible force that demanded acknowledgement. Every instinct to argue, assert dominance, or reclaim his pride seemed futile against the calm certainty she radiated. He had underestimated her, and the consequences of that misjudgment had become undeniable. For decades, James had faced high-pressure situations, mechanical failures, sudden weather changes, and emergencies that tested every ounce of skill and composure he possessed. Yet none had left him feeling as powerless, as exposed as this revelation. Sarah's calm authority, her quiet but absolute command over the situation, rendered every past challenge pale in comparison. Here was someone who had mastered both the technical and psychological aspects of aviation in a way he had never experienced. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally finding a voice, though it trembled slightly. I didn't realize," he admitted, the words tasting bitter. "I assumed I misjudged." Sarah nodded once, acknowledgement passing between them without condescension. "Assumptions are dangerous, Captain. Judgments based on incomplete information often lead to errors far costlier than mistakes in flight. Today's lesson is as much about human perception as it is about aircraft operation." Her calm delivery, almost philosophical, carried the weight of authority. She did not gloat, she did not scold. She simply stated the truth, letting reality speak for itself. James's chest tightened as he realized the enormity of the situation. The co-pilot he had dismissed was the person who controlled the very plane he now occupied. The implications extended far beyond pride. A single misstep, a single lapse in professionalism, could have had serious consequences for his career. And yet, he had been given a second chance, not because of leniency, but because Sarah had chosen to assert authority with patience and composure rather than confrontation. The passengers were boarding upstairs, oblivious to the storm that had just played out in the cockpit. James could hear their distant chatter, the rustle of luggage, the polite greetings exchanged among the crew. Meanwhile, the silent revelation had transformed the dynamics of the cockpit entirely. He was no longer the unquestioned authority. He was now a professional in a space governed by competence, integrity, and responsibility, with Sarah as the unassailable figure of leadership. James exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. Humility, he realized, was an unfamiliar sensation yet necessary. Authority, he had learned in an instant, could not be assumed. Respect, earned or unearned, could be fragile. And competence, when paired with composure, could disarm even the most experienced and confident professional. Sarah continued her checks, undisturbed by the shock she had just induced. She adjusted heading, navigation systems, and monitored communications with the control tower. Every movement was precise, deliberate, a quiet demonstration of the authority she now wielded not just over the aircraft, but over the very assumptions that had guided James's judgment. James Mitchell, veteran pilot, sat back in his seat, the weight of realization pressing down on him. His mind reeled from the humiliation, the shock, and the grudging admiration he now felt. The co-pilot he had underestimated, the one he had doubted, was the person who now held ultimate authority over the flight. The irony was sharp, bitter, and unforgettable. Finally, Sarah glanced at him once more, her voice calm, measured, and final. "Shall we proceed with takeoff, Captain?" James nodded, swallowing the lump of pride lodged in his throat. "Yes, Lieutenant Carter, let's proceed." As the engines roared to life and the plane taxied toward the runway, James could not help but reflect on the lesson unfolding before him. Experience, authority, and pride could be illusions, fragile constructs easily shattered by competence and calm certainty. And sometimes, those who appeared subordinate, underestimated, or dismissed held the power to teach the most profound lessons, lessons in humility, professionalism, and respect. In that moment, James Mitchell understood a truth he would never forget. Assumptions can blind, prejudice can mislead, and authority, when grounded in skill and composure, commands recognition that no rank or title can match. He braced for takeoff, heart racing, fully aware that the flight ahead would be memorable not for turbulence, but for the revelation that had forever altered his perspective. The engines hummed with low, steady power as the taxied toward the runway, each vibration resonating through the polished cabin floor. James Mitchell's hands gripped the yoke with an intensity born of habit and pride, yet his mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had been a captain for over 3 decades, commanding aircraft and crews across every conceivable scenario, yet here he was, stripped of the certainty he had always relied upon. The co-pilot beside him, Sarah Carter, was calm, precise, and entirely in command, leaving James unsettled and exposed. "Tower, this is 125, Sarah said clearly, her voice smooth and authoritative. "We are ready for takeoff, requesting clearance." James leaned forward, astonished at how naturally she handled the radio, coordinating with ground control and confirming every parameter without hesitation. Her proficiency was undeniable, her professionalism immaculate. He realized with discomfort that every instinct he had relied upon to assert authority was now irrelevant. The quiet tension in the cockpit had shifted entirely in her favor. James swallowed, attempting to reassert himself. "Tower, this is Captain Mitchell. Request confirmation of takeoff clearance," he said, a touch of urgency creeping into his voice. Sarah's eyes flicked toward him briefly, an almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. "Captain," she said calmly, "there is no need to repeat. Communication is already established. Focus on systems and flight readiness." The subtle rebuke left him momentarily speechless, his chest tightening as he recognized the futility of arguing. He glanced at her hands on the controls, noting the fluidity, the confidence, the absolute certainty in every movement. She adjusted throttle settings, cross-checked altimeters, and monitored wind vectors, all while maintaining an air of quiet authority. James felt a mixture of awe and humiliation. Every training exercise, every emergency he had faced in the past, paled in comparison to the skill she now displayed. His pride, once so unassailable, now trembled under the weight of her competence. Sarah turned slightly, her gaze meeting his with quiet insistence. "Captain Mitchell, I will handle takeoff. Your role is to support, monitor, and ensure passenger safety. Deviations should only occur if circumstances demand immediate response." Her voice was firm but measured, leaving no room for debate. James's throat tightened. This was no longer a test of skill. It was a confrontation of assumptions, pride, and the consequences of misjudgment. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to comply. Every instinct screamed to challenge, to assert his seniority, but he knew instinct alone would lead to chaos. Sarah's authority was not granted by rank. It emanated from mastery, preparation, and composure. He had underestimated her, and the realization stung sharply. The cockpit, once a domain he controlled entirely, had become a stage where his assumptions and biases were laid bare. The passengers were boarding above, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding in the cockpit. Their chatter, laughter, and the rustle of luggage contrasted sharply with the tense, almost cinematic confrontation below. James felt the irony keenly. The world outside remained unaware, while inside, a veteran pilot confronted his own hubris and prejudice. Every movement, every word, every calculated adjustment Sarah made underscored her authority. He realized that he had been not by arrogance, but by calm, meticulous competence. As the plane approached the end of the runway, Sarah's voice cut through the hum of engines. "Takeoff clearance confirmed. Prepare for rotation at 150 knots. James's hands hovered over the yoke, muscles tensed, heart pounding. He had executed countless takeoffs in his career, yet this one felt different, almost symbolic. It was no longer a matter of physics and procedure. It was a reckoning, a demonstration of authority and respect. The plane accelerated, the runway blurring beneath them. Sarah's hands guided the throttles, her eyes scanning instruments, her posture composed and unwavering. "Rotation," she announced, smoothly pulling the nose upward. The jet lifted gracefully into the sky, engines roaring in perfect harmony. James felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of awe, fear, and reluctant admiration. He had flown thousands of flights, yet the precision and authority she displayed left him humbled. "Altitude gaining," Sarah continued, her voice calm and measured. "Climbing to 10,000 feet, heading confirmed, turbulence minimal, system stable." James monitored the instruments, his mind absorbing every detail, every adjustment. She moved seamlessly between tasks, anticipating challenges before they arose, executing corrections before he could even formulate them. The realization settled heavily on him. Authority without competence is meaningless. Competence without arrogance commands respect. He swallowed, his pride bruised but his understanding deepened. You've got this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Sarah's eyes flicked toward him briefly, acknowledging his concession without fanfare. She did not gloat, did not mock. She simply continued her duties, calm and professional, leaving James to confront his own shortcomings. The lesson was stark. Assumptions could mislead, prejudice could blind, and competence could redefine authority in an instant. As they leveled off at cruising altitude, the cabin quiet except for the soft hum of engines, James finally spoke, his voice low, measured, and tinged with humility. "Lieutenant Carter, I misjudged you. I assumed incorrectly. I apologize." Sarah nodded, accepting the acknowledgement with professional grace. "Captain Mitchell, professionalism requires recognition of capability, regardless of personal assumptions. Learning from misjudgment is part of growth." Her tone was firm yet composed, leaving no room for resentment, only the subtle weight of authority. James exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering tension washing over him. He had survived storms, emergency landings, and mechanical failures, yet the challenge he faced here was far more personal. It was not turbulence or technical difficulty, but confrontation with his own biases and the consequences of underestimating someone based on assumptions. Sarah had demonstrated skill, authority, and composure in a way that demanded acknowledgement. The flight settled into a smooth rhythm, the plane gliding effortlessly over clouds and open terrain. James remained vigilant, his eyes scanning instruments, but he now did so with respect rather than superiority. Sarah's quiet mastery had transformed the dynamic entirely. He realized painfully but clearly that authority is not a function of ego or position alone. It is earned through competence, consistency, and calm decisiveness under pressure. Minutes stretched into hours as the plane sailed through the sky, passengers unaware of the drama above. James's pride slowly gave way to reflection. He thought of past assumptions, moments where he had allowed prejudice to cloud judgment, and the lesson crystallized. Respect must be earned, bias must be confronted, and authority is fragile when unaccompanied by competence. Sarah had demonstrated all three flawlessly. By the time the flight leveled at cruising altitude, James Mitchell understood the enormity of the confrontation. He had faced many challenges in his career, but none had humbled him like this. The silent standoff in the cockpit had resolved itself not through conflict, but through demonstration, quiet, precise, and undeniable. Authority had shifted, not by decree but by competence, leaving James to reckon with his own assumptions, biases, and pride. Sarah's gaze met his briefly, calm and unwavering. "We are stable," she said, voice steady. "Continue monitoring systems and passenger safety. I will handle the remaining flight operations." James nodded, swallowing the last remnants of his ego. He had learned in stark and unforgettable fashion that competence and composure could outmatch arrogance and assumed authority every time. And as the soared effortlessly above the clouds, the veteran pilot understood a truth he would never forget. Sometimes, the greatest challenges come not from the skis or the instruments, but from confronting oneself, and that humility, once embraced, could elevate a professional far more than pride ever could. Above the clouds, the cruised smoothly, engines humming in steady harmony. James Mitchell sat in the captain's seat, hands resting lightly on the yoke, his mind unusually restless. He had faced countless storms, mechanical failures, and high-pressure situations in his decades of flying, yet nothing had unsettled him like this flight. This time, the turbulence was not in the air but inside himself. Every instinct, every assumption, every prejudice he had carried was now under scrutiny, laid bare by the quiet, unshakable authority of Lieutenant Sarah Carter. Sarah, seated beside him, moved with the calm precision of someone who had flown thousands of hours in demanding circumstances. Her hands adjusted minor settings, fuel consumption, and monitored wind speeds with meticulous care. "We are within optimal parameters," she said, her voice calm and composed. "Passenger comfort is stable. All systems are functioning normally. Estimated arrival remains on schedule." There was no hint of arrogance, no unnecessary display of power, only the quiet demonstration of competence and professionalism. James's mind raced. He thought back to his initial refusal, the hesitation, the awkward words he had struggled to form when he first tried to assert authority. He remembered the slight edge in his voice, the internal assumptions that had led him to doubt her. Each recollection now carried the weight of embarrassment and self-reproach. He had let bias guide his judgment, and the consequences had been immediate, a lesson in humility, delivered not with confrontation but through calm, precise action. He glanced at her, noting how effortless her professionalism appeared. She had not once raised her voice, scolded, or demanded compliance. She simply demonstrated skill and composure. Every decision she made, every adjustment to the plane's controls, was a quiet assertion of authority. James realized that authority earned in this way, through competence, integrity, and calm decisiveness, was far more enduring than authority assumed through rank or tradition. James exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his pride begin to shift. For years, he had relied on experience and seniority as shields against scrutiny. Yet here, in the quiet hum of the cockpit, he confronted a profound truth. Experience alone could not command respect if accompanied by bias or arrogance. Competence and composure displayed consistently had the power to command acknowledgement, even from the most seasoned veteran. He reflected on the subtle ways bias had crept into his judgment, small assumptions that had initially seemed inconsequential. He had doubted Sarah before she had even touched the controls, questioning her abilities silently, allowing prejudices to shape his expectations. And now, facing her calm, unflinching mastery, he understood the danger of assumptions. They could blind a person to reality, undermine professional relationships, and even compromise safety. Sarah glanced at him briefly, reading the subtle shift in his demeanor. "Captain Mitchell," she said gently, "situations like this test more than technical skill. They test judgment, patience, and perception. Recognizing the value of competence, regardless of preconceptions, is part of growth in any profession." Her words were calm, measured, carrying authority without judgment. James nodded, absorbing the lesson. It was clear that this flight, routine in appearance, had become a crucible for both personal and professional reflection. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, James began to see the broader implications. It was not just about him or Sarah. It was about leadership, collaboration, and humility. He realized that a leader's effectiveness was measured not by ego or assumption, but by the ability to recognize skill, delegate authority when appropriate, and learn from others. Sarah had demonstrated all three, and he had been forced to confront his shortcomings in real time. James felt a subtle shift in the cockpit dynamic. Where tension had once prevailed, a quiet cooperation now emerged. He observed the instruments, monitored systems, and noted adjustments, but he did so with respect rather than superiority. Sarah's presence had transformed the environment, replacing conflict with efficiency, arrogance with humility, and assumption with acknowledgement. He understood that professionalism could not be feigned. It had to be demonstrated, moment by moment, in action as well as word. Outside the plane, the world remained unaware of the lesson unfolding above. Passengers rested, read, or chatted softly, oblivious to the internal dynamics of the cockpit. Yet for James, the flight had already become unforgettable. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every subtle instruction from Sarah carried meaning beyond technical skill. It was a demonstration of authority grounded in knowledge, experience, and moral integrity. He recognized that such authority was rare, precious, and transformative. James exhaled again, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. The lesson was taking root, reshaping his perception not only of Sarah but of his own professional conduct. He realized that competence, patience, and humility were more powerful than rank, ego, or assumed authority. Sarah had taught him this not through confrontation or critique, but through consistent demonstration of skill and calm assurance. It was a lesson that could not be forgotten. For the remainder of the flight, James observed quietly, taking mental notes on Sarah's methods, her efficiency, and her approach to decision-making under pressure. He recognized patterns of excellence, the subtleties of her adjustments, the clarity of her judgment. He understood that true leadership involved both capability and character, and that assumptions about people's competence could be dangerously misleading. He reflected on moments in his career when similar misjudgments might have compromised outcomes, realizing how humility could have made him a better pilot and leader. As hours passed and the plane glided steadily over the landscape, James felt a profound shift in his mindset. He had confronted personal bias, experienced a reversal of assumed authority, and witnessed the quiet power of professionalism and competence. Sarah's calm dominance had not humiliated him unnecessarily. It had taught him a lesson he would carry for the rest of his career. Respect, he realized, must be earned through consistent action, not demanded through title or position. Finally, James spoke, his voice low but deliberate. "Lieutenant Carter, I understand now. Thank you for showing me, not through words but through action, what true authority looks like." Sarah glanced at him briefly, her expression calm and acknowledging, yet unshaken. "Captain Mitchell," she replied evenly, "understanding is the first step. Application of that understanding is what makes a professional truly effective." Her words carried authority, finality, and subtle encouragement. James nodded, feeling a mixture of humility, gratitude, and determination. He knew that this flight would remain with him forever, not for the miles covered or the smooth cruising, but for the profound lesson in judgment, respect, and the recognition of skill. The experience had altered his perspective, reshaping his understanding of leadership, authority, and professionalism. As the plane continued its journey, James reflected silently on the path forward. He knew he would carry this lesson into every cockpit, every decision, and every professional interaction. Humility, competence, and acknowledgement of others' abilities were now as vital to his work as technical skill and experience. And in that realization, he found a quiet but profound sense of growth, the kind that comes from being challenged by someone who demonstrates true mastery without arrogance. The flight continued smoothly, the engines a constant, comforting hum beneath them. James Mitchell, veteran pilot, had learned more about leadership, professionalism, and respect in these hours than in decades of solo flying. Sarah Carter, calm and authoritative, had not only ensured a safe and efficient journey but had left an indelible impression, a lesson in humility, competence, and recognition that would shape his career and character forever. The descended gradually through the pale afternoon sky, sunlight glinting off the wings as James Mitchell adjusted his seat, feeling the subtle hum of engines vibrating through the polished cockpit floor. He had flown thousands of flights over the decades, but this journey had been unlike any other. His mind replayed every detail of the day, the initial refusal, the tension, the confrontation, and most profoundly, the lesson Sarah Carter had imparted without a single raised voice. Now, with the landing approaching, he understood that the culmination of the flight would be more than a technical maneuver. It would be a final test of composure, trust, and acknowledgement. Sarah's hands moved across the controls with calm, deliberate precision. Every gauge, every dial, every instrument readout had her attention. "Preparing descent to 5,000 feet, she announced, her tone steady and confident. James observed silently, his pride tempered by reflection. He monitored the instruments as she guided the aircraft downward, marveling at her methodical approach. Each adjustment was subtle yet decisive, a demonstration of expertise that left no room for error. He felt the responsibility of Copilot not as a commander, but as a participant, an observer learning humility in real time. The city below began to take shape, buildings casting elongated shadows over the streets as afternoon shifted toward evening. James could see the roads, the traffic, and the patches of greenery winding through the urban landscape. For decades, he had relied on experience and instinct, navigating through airspace with confidence. Yet now, in this quiet cockpit, he realized that confidence alone was insufficient. Competence, composure, and acknowledgement of others' skills were the true hallmarks of professionalism, lessons Sarah had embodied flawlessly. "Adjust heading to 220 degrees for alignment with runway 27, Sarah instructed, her voice firm but calm. James noted the correction, confirming it on the navigational display. The maneuver was minor in technical terms but monumental in symbolic weight. He realized that the control he had clung to was not absolute. Authority was shared, earned, and situational. Sarah's demonstration had reshaped his understanding of leadership. showing him that humility and acknowledgement of skill were as critical as technical proficiency. James exhaled slowly, feeling the last traces of tension begin to ease. The initial unease, the prideful resistance, and the internal struggle to assert dominance had all been necessary for the lesson to take root. Now, watching Sarah manage the descent with steady hands and calm judgment, he felt a profound respect. It was not fear or obligation that compelled him to follow her lead, but acknowledgement of mastery, a recognition that competence deserved deference regardless of rank or assumption. The landing sequence required precise coordination, flaps adjustment, speed control, and alignment with the glide path. Sarah managed each component effortlessly, her movements fluid and calculated. James noted the subtle interplay between instruments, wind currents, and visual cues, appreciating the depth of her skill. For the first time, he felt the thrill of observation rather than command, learning by witnessing rather than instructing. The cockpit was no longer of ego, but a classroom of professionalism and composure. Descending to final approach, Sarah announced. Runway is clear, airspeed stable, altitude steady. James monitored the readings, noting the precision with which she maintained control. Her confidence was infectious yet humbling. He felt himself adapting, syncing with her rhythm, following her lead rather than resisting. The aircraft's descent was smooth, each adjustment deliberate, calculated, and executed without hesitation. James realized that he was witnessing the embodiment of professionalism, skill exercised with calm authority, free from ego or assumption. The passengers, now settled into their seats, were unaware of the lessons unfolding above them. They chatted quietly, read magazines, or observed the world outside their windows, blissfully ignorant of the internal dynamics of the cockpit. James considered the irony. The most critical events of this flight had occurred silently, internally, in a space hidden from the world. Yet those lessons would resonate far longer than the miles traveled or the altitude achieved. Sarah initiated the flare for landing, subtly raising the nose as the runway approached. James felt the plane's response, a gentle lift that countered the descent, aligning wheels perfectly with the tarmac. Landing configuration confirmed, she said softly. Set, flaps optimal. The plane touched down smoothly, tires meeting asphalt with precision, engines adjusting seamlessly. James exhaled, a wave of relief mingled with admiration washing over him. He had not flown solo today, yet he had experienced a journey far more impactful than any solo flight. A journey of awareness, humility, and recognition. As the plane decelerated along the runway, James turned to Sarah, meeting her eyes with newfound respect. "Lieutenant Carter," he began, voice steady but carrying the weight of acknowledgement, "I cannot overstate how much I've learned today, not just about flying but about professionalism, humility, and leadership." Sarah nodded, her expression calm but acknowledging. "Captain Mitchell, understanding is the first step. Application of that understanding in practice is what defines a professional. You have demonstrated willingness to learn, which is commendable." The taxi to the terminal was quiet, each movement deliberate. James observed as Sarah coordinated with ground control, guiding the aircraft to its designated gate with precision. The passengers, now disembarking, offered smiles and polite words, unaware of the profound lessons the cockpit had witnessed. James felt a mixture of gratitude, humility, and determination. This flight had reshaped his perspective, challenging assumptions, and reshaping his understanding of authority and competence. As the engines powered down and the cabin settled into silence, James reflected on the journey. Authority, he realized, was not a function of rank or tradition, but of competence, composure, and the quiet demonstration of skill. Sarah had embodied these qualities flawlessly, teaching lessons that no textbook, simulation, or instruction manual could convey. The impact of her actions extended beyond the flight itself, reshaping James's perception of leadership, humility, and collaboration. Finally, James turned to Sarah, extending his hand. "Thank you," he said, voice measured and sincere. "Not just for safely flying this plane, but for showing me what true professionalism looks like." Sarah accepted the handshake, her grip firm and composed. "Recognition is part of growth, Captain Mitchell," she replied. "It is never too late to learn and apply those lessons in practice." James nodded, feeling the resonance of her words, internalizing the final piece of the lesson she had delivered with unwavering calm. Day's flight, which had begun with tension, prejudice, and ego, ended with acknowledgement, reflection, and growth. James Mitchell, veteran pilot, had confronted not only a challenge in the air, but also the subtle biases that shaped his judgment. Sarah Carter, through quiet authority and impeccable competence, had redefined the dynamics of the cockpit, leaving a lasting impression that would guide him for the rest of his career. The plane had come to a complete stop at the terminal, engines ticking down to silence. James Mitchell sat back in his seat, hands resting lightly on the armrests, his mind replaying every moment of the flight. What had begun as a routine journey had transformed into an unforgettable lesson in humility, authority, and respect. Sarah Carter, calm and unwavering, had not only piloted the flawlessly, but had forced him to confront his biases, assumptions, and the fragility of perceived authority. For the first time in decades, James understood the true weight of leadership and the subtle power of quiet competence. Passengers began to disembark, their polite greetings and cheerful chatter providing a backdrop to the profound personal transformation occurring in the cockpit. James observed the flow of people with a sense of awe. They had no idea what had unfolded above, yet the lessons of the flight were etched indelibly in his mind. Every assumption he had made, every prejudice he had harbored had been challenged and overturned, and all of it had been accomplished with poise, precision, and unwavering professionalism. Sarah removed her headset, placing it neatly on the console, and glanced at James. "We have arrived safely," she said, her voice calm but carrying the authority of someone fully in command. James nodded, swallowing the lump of pride that had weighed on him for hours. He had begun the flight with doubt, hesitation, and subtle judgment. He now ended it with humility, reflection, and a deep respect for the woman beside him. "Lieutenant Carter," he began, his voice steady yet tinged with sincere awe, "I cannot overstate how much I've learned today. Not just about flying, but about leadership, judgment, and professionalism. Your composure, your expertise, it's unlike anything I've encountered in my career." Sarah's expression remained composed, but a subtle acknowledgement in her eyes conveyed that she understood the weight of his words. She did not boast, she did not revel in his humility. She simply accepted it with the grace of someone secure in their competence. James reflected on the irony of the situation. He had initially refused to fly with Sarah, driven by biases he barely admitted even to himself. Yet through her calm demonstration of skill, she had earned his respect in the most profound way possible, without confrontation, without humiliation, simply through action. He realized that this was a lesson far more valuable than any flight manual or professional seminar could provide. It was a lesson in recognizing competence, confronting assumptions, and valuing skill above ego. The flight crew approached, offering polite greetings and collecting personal items. James observed their subtle glances toward Sarah, noticing the quiet deference in their behavior. While passengers remained unaware of the dynamics that had played out, the professional respect among the crew was palpable. James felt a sense of inclusion, a recognition that the lessons of the cockpit extended beyond him alone. Sarah's example had set a standard, one that demanded acknowledgement and fostered growth. As the final passengers disembarked, James turned fully to Sarah, extending his hand with genuine sincerity. "Thank you," he said, his tone deliberate and heartfelt. "Not just for piloting the aircraft, but for teaching me a lesson I will never forget. You've shown me what true professionalism, authority, and leadership look like." Sarah accepted the handshake, her grip firm yet measured. "Recognition is part of growth, Captain Mitchell," she replied. "Acknowledging competence is the first step toward becoming a better professional. You've demonstrated that willingness to learn." James felt a profound shift within himself. The lessons of the flight were not confined to the cockpit or the technical realm of aviation. They extended into every aspect of professional and personal life, acknowledging talent, respecting skill, confronting assumptions and practicing humility. He realized that his experience and position alone could not command respect. It had to be earned through competence, composure, and ethical professionalism. Sarah had demonstrated all three, leaving an indelible mark on him. He thought back to the start of the flight, the moment he had refused to fly with her, and felt the weight of embarrassment. Yet that moment had been necessary for the transformation to occur. Without the initial bias and challenge, the lesson would have lacked its impact. Now, he understood that true growth often comes from confronting discomfort and being willing to acknowledge mistakes. Sarah had provided that opportunity with remarkable finesse, blending authority with grace, competence with composure. The crew began preparing the plane for its next flight, securing instruments and checking systems. James watched, reflecting on the transformation that had occurred in himself over the course of mere hours. He had come into the cockpit confident, assertive, and subtly judgmental. He was leaving with humility, insight, and a renewed understanding of what it meant to respect authority rooted in competence rather than assumption. The flight had been a crucible, shaping him as much as any storm or emergency ever could. As Sarah began documenting the flight report, James took a moment to observe her methodical approach. She moved with purpose and efficiency, her notes precise, her attention unwavering. Every action reaffirmed the lessons of the day. Authority is earned through skill, composure is as vital as experience, and acknowledgement of others, competence fosters growth, not resentment. He made a mental note to carry these principles forward, integrating them into every professional interaction from this day onward. Finally, James turned toward her one last time before stepping out onto the tarmac. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, voice steady and respectful, "I hope we fly together again. I want to learn from you not just as a co-pilot but as a professional and as a mentor." Sarah's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Captain Mitchell, competence and growth are ongoing journeys. I look forward to future collaboration." Her response was poised, professional, and encouraging, a final affirmation of the respect now established between them. As James descended the steps from and felt the tarmac beneath his feet, he carried a new awareness. The flight had been about much more than altitude, speed, or navigation. It had been about leadership, judgment, and the courage to confront personal bias. Sarah Carter had taught him lessons that no manual could provide: humility, acknowledgement of skill, and the quiet authority that commands respect without demanding it. Looking back at the plane, James felt gratitude, respect, and a deep sense of personal growth. He knew that this experience would remain with him for the rest of his career, shaping his interactions, judgments, and professional conduct. The veteran pilot had flown many planes, navigated countless challenges, and faced innumerable emergencies. Yet none had left a mark as profound as the lessons learned from a co-pilot who, through quiet competence and unwavering professionalism, had earned his respect and reshaped his perspective forever. And as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting golden light across the tarmac, James Mitchell realized that the most valuable flights were not just those measured in miles or hours, but those measured in lessons learned, assumptions corrected, and respect earned. This flight had been one of those rare journeys, and he would carry its lessons always.